Coming up in today's newscast, the United States assures Israel that its policy on Iran has not changed in light of recent comments from President Trump. Israeli Arab poet Dareen Tatour gets 5 months in jail for inciting violence, and you won't want to miss this insane Lego exhibit happening right now in the port of Tel Aviv. U.S. President Donald Trump stunned allies and enemies alike the other day after announcing that he'd be willing to meet with Iranian leaders with, quote, no preconditions. He's just doubled down on that position in a rally in Tampa, Florida, saying that those talks could happen pretty soon before quickly following up with, quote, maybe not. Now, the possibility of a U.S.-Iranian summit has left Israeli leaders a bit uneasy, to say the least, despite American assurances that Trump's policy on Iran has not changed in the slightest. Israeli intel and security was cited as one of the chief reasons for Trump's pullout from the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal with Iran. Prior to the signing of that deal, the United States has had zero formal communications with the regime since the 1979 storming of the U.S. Embassy. It took years of mediation to reach the landmark 2015 accord, in which Iran agreed to slow its nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of international sanctions. Any bridges there were all but torched when Trump announced that the United States would no longer be a party to that deal. Now, despite Trump's apparent optimism over the possibility of talks with Iran, Iranian leaders seem far less enthusiastic. The head of Iran's Revolutionary Guards has denounced the idea entirely. Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, has just said that if Trump really wants talks, then threats, sanctions, and PR stunts won't work. Quote, try respect for Iranians and for international commitments, end quote. Still, other Iranian officials have said that this offer should not be outright dismissed, especially considering that the rest of the nuclear deal's signatories have yet to renegotiate the deal, and with fresh U.S. sanctions arriving in the coming days. Israeli leaders are undoubtedly uneasy over the idea of the U.S. even considering a sit-down with their sworn enemy, which may be why Netanyahu has also invested heavily in relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Today, we've learned that Russian forces have just removed Iranian proxy forces from an 85-kilometer buffer zone alongside the Israeli border. An American pastor named Andrew Brunson has been imprisoned in Turkey for the last 2 years and is charged with both espionage and affiliating with known terror groups. Brunson has just been released on house arrest ahead of his trial, but the United States is presuming his innocence while demanding his release, threatening sanctions against its NATO ally, Turkey, if he isn't freed back to the United States. Or Turkish President Erdogan has just issued some very interesting and harsh words in response to that. Take a look.
Ama kalkıp da yani Amerika'da özellikle evangelist, Siyonist anlayışın bu dayanışmasını ve bu tür bir tehditkar dil kullanmasını bizim kabul etmemiz mümkün değil.
Well, joining me now with more on this is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, expert on the Middle East from the Begin Sadat Center at Bar-Ilan University. Dr. Kedar, thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
Now, my first question, the words evangelist, Zionist, those words stand out in a very religious train of thought. So does this have anything to do with maybe American-Israeli relations?
Well, for this, you have to understand the mindset of Erdogan. He thinks like an Islamist, a prominent member of the Muslim Brotherhood, which see no reason for the mere existence of the State of Israel, even on the size of a stamp on the seashore of Tel Aviv. And from his point of view, Jews should be dhimmis, live under the Islamic Ottoman rule, as he thinks. So anybody in any state which supports Israel, and especially conspire with the Jews to move the embassy, for example, to Jerusalem, he sees this as a mere existence, it's as a threat on the existence of Islam. Because Judaism and Christianity, which are both viewed as null and void religions, according to his view of Islam, come back to life. In Jerusalem, means Jews come back to their homeland and so forth. So this is everything which negates this way of worldview of Erdogan. It becomes racist and become problematic from his point of view.
Right, but Turkey has collaborated with the United States, as Erdogan did point out, as a NATO ally. So why this kind of language now?
I have news for you. The membership of Turkey in NATO is for more than 20 years is partial. First of all, Turkey never took any part in any action against any Islamic country, not Iraq, Afghanistan, so forth. Secondly, The only thing which keeps Turkey still in Europe is its location to the south from Russia and like a foothold in the Middle East, and the Incirlik Air Base, which is the southern part of Turkey, which is part of every planning vis-a-vis the Middle East, as long as he agrees. Because usually he doesn't agree to launch any attack on any Islamic targets in the Middle East from his soil. So his membership in NATO is not complete, and he himself actually leads Turkey gradually out of NATO. So he's the last one on earth to come and complain about his membership in NATO, which anyway is partial according to his view. So now comes Trump, and talks in favor of Israel in all kinds of aspects.
Well, in this case, he's threatening sanctions against Turkey if they don't free Brunson from the country.
Look, I'm not sure that Trump will have his American generals in his side because they do not want to aggravate Erdogan. They're afraid of him. He is impulsive, and he gets angry very easily, and he might make all kinds of very quick decisions, like get out of Incirlik and leave me alone. So this is why the American army, in my view, has all kinds of fears that Donald Trump may push Erdogan to kick America all out from Incirlik, and it will actually change all their plans. Don't forget that Erdogan also has some very, very heavy leverage on Europe, either by the refugees, which he can stream them. He has like 5 million refugees from Syria, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, everywhere in Asia are refugees in Turkey. He can send them again to Europe as he did in 2015 and flood Europe with refugees. The second thing, Europe also is part of NATO, and everything which we said about Incirlik and Americans applies also on
Ironically,
Europe.
Trump has threatened to withdraw from NATO. Either way, this is a very intricate situation. We don't have enough time to go into it much more. But
look, you never can expect what action of NATO he will be part of and what action he will stay out.
Sure. Dr. Kadar, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Of course. Well, several years ago, at the height of the 2015 terror wave in Israel, an Arab-Israeli woman was arrested and charged with inciting violence with her poetry. The prosecution of poet Dareen Tatour quickly became an international incident, and now, following years of litigation, Tatour has just been sentenced to 5 months in prison, followed by an additional half year of suspended term. Her original poem, titled "Resist, My People, Resist," was posted to social media sometime in October of 2015. Now, at this time, Palestinian terror against Israelis and IDF soldiers had hit a breaking point in a 6-month period of random attacks known locally as the Stabbing Intifada. Video images alongside the poem included Palestinians attacking IDF soldiers with rocks and slingshots. After her arrest, Tatour denied that her poem contained any calls for violence. One line in her text, however, included the words, quote, "I will not succumb to the peaceful solution, never lower my flags until I evict them from my land," end quote. In the poem, Tatour seems to compare herself to other so-called martyrs who were killed while attempting to carry out terror attacks. An Israeli court announced upon her conviction that the poem did indeed amount to terror incitement and that free expression had its limits. For some, this was quite a fair ruling, but for other Israelis and many in the international community, this was seen as a massive violation of free speech. They point out that although Tatour's words do perhaps encourage resistance, they are merely words at the end of the day.
There was no question that this judge was going to send her to jail, and we're still questioning how come a poetess is going to jail because of a poem she wrote.
Others have pointed out that similar cases of incitement against Arab Israelis often fails to even come to charges, while in this case a symbolic poem was flagged at record pace. Tatour has already served the majority of her sentence while awaiting sentencing. She will likely spend a further 2 months in prison. Now, alongside the jailing of an Arab Israeli for a poem that incited violence against Jews, today an op-ed published in an Israeli news site called for similar violence against members of Israel's LGBTQ+ community. In that case, however, there were no arrests nor charges. The article was pulled from the internet following complaints by activists, and the news site's representatives have since apologized, claiming that the article was accidentally uploaded in the first place. Now, in addition, for summons of violence against the gay community, the article written by Moshe Hastai rallied readers against what he calls, quote, radical feminists penetrating the army and positions of power, end quote. African asylum seekers, Bedouins, and the Druze are included on this list as well. The writer cites ancient Jewish traditions as grounds for, quote, eliminating and, quote, expelling these communities, akin to the Amalek Code found in the Bible, commanding deaths to evildoers. It may be no coincidence that this article was published mere days before the largest ever Jerusalem Pride Parade is set to begin. Security this year has boosted accordingly, involving nearly 2,500 police officers who will be tasked with protecting participants in the celebration of LGBTQ plus freedom. But the security precautions are not without their reasons. 3 years ago, an ultra-Orthodox man stabbed 6 participants at the annual Jerusalem Pride Parade, killing a teenage girl. This same man, Yishai Schlissel, also stabbed marchers during the same Pride Parade 10 years prior. He was initially convicted with 12 years in prison, a sentence later reduced. It's unclear why or how the man was able to revisit the same parade a second time and carry out a second slew of terror attacks. Now, recent debate over Israel's last-minute exclusion of same-sex couples from a surrogacy law has renewed the struggle for gay equality in the country. This is but one reason why this year's Jerusalem Pride Parade will probably draw record numbers and why both sides are becoming even more impassioned than ever for a swift resolution. Well, even more opponents against the newly passed nation-state law are emerging. Opponents that include Israel's president, top members of the Druze community, and now a retired Arab-Israeli Supreme Court judge. Now, TV's Aaron Porras is here with more on these developments. Now, Aaron, the Druze have made their outrage very known from the get-go on this, so let's start there. What are the updates on that front?
Well, many Druze community leaders, Knesset members, spiritual heads, etc., as you've just said, have already voiced opposition to this law. And they met with President Rivlin and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and they're not impressed by the apologies and the words. And that anger is spreading quickly. As we've reported, the majority of the Druze community serves in the national service or in the military or something like that. But following the passage of the law, several Druze officers and soldiers have very publicly resigned from their posts in protest against the law, despite Druze leaders urging them to keep politics and the IDF separate. Now, earlier this week, Druze officer Captain Amir Jamal posted an open letter to the Prime Minister explaining that he would no longer serve the State of Israel when in the end he'll be treated as a Class B citizen. Then just last night, another Druze officer, Shadi Zidan, who'd been with the IDF for 5 years, also announced intentions to resign.
Right, and what's been the response to this from leadership, from the IDF and so forth?
So again, Druze leaders are telling the community to calm down, and they've reiterated that the Druze will continue to fight for the nation with pride. And the IDF Chief of Staff, Gadi Eisenkot, has been reaching out to soldiers and commanders as well, assuring them that the camaraderie and brotherhood between soldiers of all groups, including minorities, will continue unchanged. That being said, again, many soldiers are not willing to put up with the double standard. And, by the way, I mentioned Captain Jamal earlier. The IDF responded directly to his post online, saying that the IDF is a people's army and that unity among the ranks is prioritized. But then the statement ends with chastisement, criticizing Jamal for making unauthorized political statements. And then yesterday, by the way, he was suspended for 2 weeks, arguably not the best way to build trust.
No, arguably not. But in addition to Israel's minority groups that do feel insulted by a law that they say makes them second-class citizens, Jewish members from Israel's majority are joining that discord, if I believe, right?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll mention in a rare move, retired Arab-Israeli Supreme Court Judge Salim Jubran is publicly calling on the court to overturn the nation-state law altogether. Speaking on Israeli radio, Judge Jubran called it bad and unnecessary. He said that had he not retired last year, he would have immediately shut it down himself. He argues that it creates a superior and inferior class, especially with reference to the downgrading of the Arabic language to special status rather than an official language on par with Hebrew. So he's now actually petitioning the High Court to overturn the law, and actually the left-wing Meretz party has also petitioned the High Court for the same thing, alleging that the law contradicts the Human Dignity and Liberty Law passed in 1992 here in Israel. As for President Rivlin, we mentioned him earlier, his protest is that he promised to actually sign the bill in Arabic, which goes back to the irony of Arabic's shaky status right now.
Right, so let's explain that. So probably Rivlin's signature would still be legally binding on the page in any form that it took, but because the new law no longer seems to include Arabic as a state-sanctioned language legally, his signature in Arabic does open that question in a very symbolic way anyway over whether or not that would make it valid. But these protests aside, I will say that opposition to this law does face an uphill battle. The government has only doubled down on what they say is its necessity. And according to them, it's only designed to preserve Israel's Jewish character into its basic laws. In any event, thanks for keeping us updated, Aaron.
Thank you.
Well, the whole world is slowly but surely making the move towards more sustainable, renewable, and green energies. But there's an emphasis on the word slowly there, since much of the market still has a long way to go before it truly becomes profitable. Well, Israeli company Moa Analytics will hopefully start to bridge the gaps, and here to explain is Moa Analytics CEO and founder Danny Gimpel. Danny, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So what exactly do you guys do? What does Moa do?
Yeah, so I think, we started in a bit of a history of learning how renewable energy is not very stable. It's not usually putting out electricity when it's most wanted and needed. And the critical piece to making it stable and making it delivered on demand and at highest prices is storage, energy storage, batteries. But really to know how to use them, how to size them, requires lots and lots of analytics and simulations. And that's what our software does. We simulate how to integrate wind, batteries, and solar to get best value electricity delivered.
Now I've got a question. Why is it different to store energy from, a green solution like this as opposed to energy from a power plant? Like, what exactly is the difference?
Yeah, so, fossil fuel, its energy is really kind of stored in the fuel. So whenever you need that energy, you burn it.
It's a physical thing that you have.
It's a physical thing. It's always embedded in the actual fuel. So when you burn it, you put out emissions. You have all sorts of bad effects. But when you're actually generating electricity from wind and from the sun, it's clean. It's sustainable. It's pretty much all the time, constant, but it's not always there. So with batteries, it's the paradigm shift. It changes the whole game, and you can really stabilize it, and then you just have to know measuring the values in the market. When is it most needed? And that's really where our complexity of the software enables highest value, highest profits.
So tell me about the software. Like, what have the results been for you guys so far? What have you seen?
Yeah, so actually we, at the beginning of this year, got into a partnership with Barclays Accelerator and powered by Techstars. And it's brought us into actually the lion's den of the customers that really want to analyze how do you make best profits from renewable projects.
And these are probably businesses, or these are
banks, investors, and as well power plant developers, those that develop these big wind farms.
So they're embracing green as opposed to saying, oh no, we want to stay in the past.
Very much so.
That's
it's very high corporate priority, and they look at how our software enables their profits to be improved when they're designing these plants and when they're hopefully going to operate them on these cash flows, how much electricity they're supplying, when, and what kind of profits.
Well, unfortunately with business, so much is bottom line oriented, but I think for you to find a solution that helps the bottom line and helps the earth and helps companies and people want to make that change, that's to me all the difference. You're doing great work. Danny, it was nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Of course,
pleasure.
thank you. Good, keep it up.
Thank you.
Well, the International Children's Games are more than your average fun and games. They're actually recognized by the International Olympic Committee, and they pit 1,500 boys and girls from 29 countries head-to-head in events like volleyball, swimming, judo, and track and field. So basically, if you're between the ages of 12 and 15, this is literally your Olympics. Well, for the first time ever, the games are taking place in the city of Jerusalem. In fact, they're underway right now as I speak. The first International Children's Games were held way back in 1968 in Slovenia, where 9 East European cities sent their kids to compete for the gold. Well, nearly 50 years later, those games have taken place in more than 500 cities in the game's history, bringing together some of the most talented youths from all over the world. Everything is operated by the same organizers who run the Winter and Summer Olympics, meaning that this has the official ICG stamp of approval. Things kicked off yesterday in Jerusalem, where athletes from Canada, Romania, South Korea, Switzerland, Taiwan, and many, many more were welcomed in an opening ceremony. Israeli athletes are, of course, in the mix there too, and everyone's going to be gunning for gold in 9 different events: basketball, soccer, volleyball, fencing, judo, track and field, tennis, swimming, and streetball, which, if you're wondering, is a twist on regulation basketball. Organizers and athletes alike are thrilled to be competing in Jerusalem for the very first time in the game's history, and from all of us at ILTV, have fun, kids. Lior Raz is both the face of and one of the minds behind the hit Israeli series Fauda. In the show, he stars as an Israeli secret agent hunting down terrorists in the occupied Palestinian territories. But for his next role, well, we might just be seeing Raz playing the bad guy role himself. And ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh is here with all those juicy details. What's up?
Thanks, Brett. Like you said, we are used to seeing Raz being the good guy, and now there have been reports that Raz has just been cast in a big-budget Netflix film titled Six Underground, where he's set to be playing the bad guy this time. Now, other than the fact that he will be acting in what is set to be a huge film, Raz is also joining a cast that includes the one and only Ryan Reynolds.
From Deadpool.
Exactly, Dave Franco, and, just a bunch of huge stars.
So obviously this is huge news for any Fauda fans out there. What else do you know about the production of the movie or the story?
All right, well, Raz's role is being kept pretty under wraps for now. The project is described as kind of a Deadpool meets Mission Impossible, which I think means we can expect some humor along with maybe some raunchy comedy that Ryan Reynolds is known
Mission
for.
Impossible.
Exactly. Now, the plot is supposedly about 6 billionaires that fake their own deaths to form a crime-fighting team. Big-time Hollywood director Michael Bay is signed on to direct, making this his follow-up to the Transformers series with Steven Spielberg.
All right, look, I'm going to go on record here. I am an unabashed, unashamed Michael Bay fan.
Yes.
Unashamed here.
Yes.
This film actually sounds a lot like his Bad Boys movies, which first put Bay on the map, but it also reminds me of this weird kind of action comedy social satire movie that he made called Pain and Gain. That's a totally underrated film if you haven't seen it. Just want to say that.
Big fan over here, yeah.
Great, great. So when are cameras going to roll on this new project? When are we going to film?
All right, so according to the Hollywood Reporter, the film is set to begin shooting next month in Italy and the United Arab Emirates. This country, of course, does not have any diplomatic ties with the state of Israel, does not recognize Israel's right to exist, and obviously doesn't accept Israeli passports, which of course Lior has. But I will say that Israel and the UAE have seen something of an unofficial cooperation in the recent years due to their joint opposition against Iran. Sometimes Israelis can get into and work inside the UAE if they hold dual citizenship, but this isn't the case with Lior.
Right.
So for now, it's unclear if or how Raz will be able to shoot scenes there. But, you know, hey, being a huge super Hollywood star, I'm sure he can make something happen.
Sure, sure. I mean, Raz also recently starred in another major Hollywood film
Right.
Alongside Rooney Mara and Joaquin Phoenix about Mary Magdalene. I
Right.
mean, I'd say he's about to explode onto the American scene.
Understatement. And just earlier this month, Netflix, which also streams Raz's series, Fauda, announced that they have picked up a full season of a new show that's set to be written by Raz
Right.
and his Fauda co-creator called Hit and Run, which is set to be released in 2020. So, you know, it's safe to say that Lior Raz is making his Hollywood mark, and he is not taking his time about it.
Well, in that case, I'm sure we'll be hearing his name again and again in the very near future.
Definitely.
Thanks for the info, Manuel.
Thank you.
So I don't know what it is about Israelis, but everywhere I turn, they seem absolutely obsessed with Legos. Yes, Legos, the little blocks that you used to play with as a kid, or maybe still play with, I don't know. I feel like every week we have another headline involving Legos, and today is, of course, no exception to that. A new Lego park has just opened in the city of Holon, and now you can even see more Lego sculpture beauty in action at a new Lego exhibit at the port of Tel Aviv. Featuring stunning recreations of animals, objects, and even entire cityscapes, the LEGO exhibit in Tel Aviv is not one to be missed. Now, it took teams over 10,000 hours to put everything together using over 1 million individual LEGO pieces. A ticket will only cost you about $20, and trust me, it's worth every penny. This is all the work of one single LEGO-crazed man, Sean Kenny from New York. Kenny is actually a full-time LEGO-sanctioned LEGO artist who's made everything from children's books to commercials to LEGO peacocks and, yes, functioning LEGO lamps. Now, there are only 16 certified LEGO-approved professionals in the entire world, and as far as we know, this is the first time that any of them have put on an exhibit in Israel. Kenny's exhibit is currently ongoing at the Hangar 11 space located at the Port of Tel Aviv. It even features a sector for interactive LEGO activities where kids, parents, or whoever really, can take part in the fun themselves. Not to give anything away here, but it also involves LEGO robots that you can play with. Okay, now, if you're wondering exactly why Israel seems so obsessed with Legos, the curator at Hangar 11 may have a little clue here. During the press review, promoter Lior Kamali told journalists that there's more to Legos than just fun and games. They're actually a crucial educational tool, especially for kids with ADHD. And that's why he says it's so important for him to showcase Lego art in the country. Interesting.
The Hebrew word of the day is brought to you by IDC Summer Ulpan, open to everyone.
And now a short quote to begin our Hebrew word of the day. You weren't perfect, but you made life worth it. Well, whoever wrote those words and strung them into a sentence is the kind of poet who makes our very human existence worth it. And that's why today's word is mishorer, which is how you say a poet in Hebrew. Now, you might think of a typical mishorer or a poet as someone who just writes haikus or an iambic pentameter all day. Well, I invite you to expand your mind, because what is a song if not a poem set to music written by a mishorer or a female mishoreret? There's a reason why Bob Dylan received the Nobel Prize in Literature, and why rapper Kendrick Lamar received hip-hop's first ever Pulitzer Award. They're both mishorerim. Folks, they're poets. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy with a chance of light showers, but warm with a low of 78 or 26 degrees Celsius. And tomorrow you can expect a higher chance of rain and a slight drop in temperatures to a high of 86 or 30 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.68 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News, and of course on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Brent Allen Smith, and thanks for watching.